nation in the history of the world, and I think that's what creates so much frustration out there, is because people don't see that we're getting back to basics and back to fundamentals. We're increasing the size and reach.
We're going to take you back live now to the House, and they finish up work on the Arizona land swap bill.
The Union for further consideration of H.R. 1904. Will the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Latourette, kindly resume the chair?
Bigger print. Oh, I love that. The House is in the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for further consideration of H.R. 1904, which the clerk will report by title.
A bill to facilitate the efficient extraction of mineral resources in southeast Arizona by authorizing and directing an exchange of federal and non-federal land and for other purposes.
When the Committee of the Whole rose earlier today, a request for recorded vote on Amendment Number 3, printed in House Report 112-258 by the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Grijalva, had been postponed. Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, proceedings will now resume on those amendments printed in Part B of House Report 112-258, on which further proceedings were postponed in the following order. Amendment Number 1 by Mr. Lujan of New Mexico, and Amendment Number 2 by Mr. Markey of Massachusetts, Amendment Number 3 by Mr. Grijalva of Arizona. The Chair will reduce to 2 minutes the time for any electronic vote after the first vote in this series. The unfinished business is the request for recorded vote on Amendment Number 1 in Part B of House Report 112-258 by the gentleman from New Mexico, Mr. Lujan, on which further proceedings were postponed and which the noes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
In Part B of House Report Number 112-258, offered by Mr. Lujan of New Mexico.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in favor of taking this vote by a recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having arisen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their vote by electronic device. This will be a 15-minute vote followed by 2 2-minute votes.
A series of 8 votes on the House floor, most of which are related to this bill that would create the largest copper mine in the country and expand the Tonto National Forest. This first vote is 15 minutes. It's one of 3 amendment votes to the bill. Ben Ray Lujan, Democrat of New Mexico, offering an amendment that would exempt all American Indian sacred and cultural sites from being included in this land exchange. We spoke to a Capitol Hill reporter for more details on this bill. Erin Kelly of the Arizona Republic writes that this bill will, quote, clear the way for development of North America's largest copper mine. How will it do that?
What it would do, it would authorize a land exchange. The reason that Congress has to get involved is that basically what they're trying to do, the developers, is swap private land for public land in a national forest in order to facilitate the development of this mine.
And the developers get how much land, and the federal government gets how much land?
Well, what the bill would do is it would authorize the land exchange in which Resolution Copper, the developer, would get about 2,400 acres in what's known as the Oak Flat area of the Tonto National Forest. And in return, they would have to give more than 5,000 acres of environmentally sensitive land throughout the state of Arizona to the federal government.
And this 5,000 acres is acreage that the federal government obviously wants?
Yes. It's considered to be have important environmental significance, and it's land that would be beneficial to the environment and to some of the cultural assets of the area.
You report that Arizona Republican Paul Gosar and Democrat Raul Grijalva are leading the support and opposition to the bill, respectively. What are their arguments for and against?
Well, basically, Congressman Gosar represents Superior, and the mine would be built near Superior. The folks in Superior are really supportive of the mine project for the most part because they believe that it's going to be a big job boon for them. Developers are estimating it would create about 1,400 direct mining jobs and about 2,300 indirect jobs and generate about $62 billion for the state of Arizona over the 50-year life of the mine. So both Congressman Gosar, who is a Republican, and his predecessor, Ann Kirkpatrick, who was a Democrat, they both supported it largely because they see it as an important jobs bill for their district. Congressman Grijalva is a a big environmentalist and a big supporter of Native American tribal rights, and he believes that the project is going to damage sacred Indian grounds and possibly threaten the region's water supply. So for those reasons, he's been adamantly opposed to it.
Look over to the Senate side for a second. The Arizona's two senators, where do they stand on this, and what likely action is ahead in the U.S. Senate?
Both the senators, both John McCain and Jon Kyl, have been big supporters of the project from the beginning. The fate of the bill in the Senate is much less certain than it is in the House. Last Congress, it did get through the Senate Energy Committee with the support of Democratic Chairman Jeff Bingaman. It never got to an actual vote of the Senate, so it died over there last session. It's unclear what's going to happen this time. There is some hope, I think, among supporters that eventually what's going to happen is that the bill might be attached to a large omnibus lands bill, and that bill might include some things that Senator Harry Reid, the majority leader, would like for the state of Nevada. And so for that reason, they have some hope that it might get through.
Erin Kelly is in Gannett's Washington Bureau, reporter for the Arizona Republic, and you can read her work at azcentral.com. Thank you for that update.
You're very welcome.
And the House is in the first of 3 amendment votes to that Arizona bill. This one by Ben Ray Lujan of New Mexico would exempt all American Indian sacred and cultural sites from being included in the land exchange. 2 more amendment votes will follow, also a motion to recommit and final passage after that. Also a vote on the rule for 2 measures concerning the Internal Revenue Code, one repealing a 3% government withholding on contractor payments, and the other would effectively pay for that repeal by overturning a provision in the 2010 health care bill to expand eligibility for some benefits. So that rule vote is still ahead. So while we're in this 15-minute vote, we're going to bring you part of a conversation that's one of our Spotlight on Magazines, our weekly series on Washington Journal. This week, The Atlantic's Megan McArdle, senior editor with that magazine, talked about their investigative report looking at whether members of Congress are guilty of insider trading, and we will show you as much of that conversation as we can as this vote continues.
Wednesday at 9:15, and as we do every week at this time, we take a spotlight on magazines in which we take an article and kind of talk with a guest about it. This week, our guest, Megan McArdle, she wrote a piece in The Atlantic, Capital Gains, Are Members of Congress Guilty of Insider Trading? And does it matter? And you can find the piece on theatlantic.com if you want to read it for yourself. But Megan McArdle, to start off with, are members of Congress guilty of insider trading?
Well, this is actually turns out to be a complicated question. So in the 90s, there was a professor who did a study where he actually basically, it was less of a study than kind of observational data. He looked at what the disclosure forms that members of Congress have to file, and he tracked those things with things that had happened to companies that they owned. So, for example, Lloyd Benson had sort of conveniently sold bought and sold some dairy companies before regulations that affected what they were doing in terms of prices and so forth. And so there was a business professor in the South who saw this. It made sort of a splash on one of those news shows, and like 60 Minutes type shows, he said. And so he was watching it, and he thought, well, that's not right. You need to do this right. You need to actually look and see if, as a whole, does Congress outperform the market? And so it took him forever. He had to get all of these disclosure forms. This was back before really the internet, and they weren't really available. And so he actually goes through, he gets a team together, including his wife, and digs into exactly, puts a data set together, and then he looks to see, do they outperform a kind of standard portfolio? And the answer was, first one was published in 2004, and that was the Senate, and the answer was they outperformed by about 30%, which is huge. It doesn't sound like that much. But first of all, this is the 90s. So we're talking about, you know, anyone who can breathe and like hit a key on a keyboard can make 20% in the market. And so to outdo that is an enormous. Then he followed up this year with a study on the House where he actually shows that indeed they don't overperform quite as well. They get about 6%. But that's still an enormous overperformance compared to the rest of the market.
So before we get too far, how do we define insider trading?
So this is interesting. A lot of people think that what insider trading is kind of a fraud on the market. But it's actually a little more complicated than that. So, for example, if you work for a publicly traded company and you are aware that, say, your new product line isn't doing so well, and you trade on that information, you are, under the original law, just definitely guilty of insider trading.
Mm-hmm.
And this became a crime during the 30s, by the way. Before that, it was actually kind of something people just wanted to get in the action. They didn't really think of it as, they expected that everyone was crooks. And so that's definitely insider trading. On the other hand, what's definitely not insider trading is, say, if you are talking about this with another employee at the in the men's room of a movie theater, and you think it's empty, but it turns out there's someone in a stall, and they overhear you, and they run right out and trade. That's totally legal. But there's a gray area in between, and that's where actually a lot of the controversy comes. So, for example, there was a printer in the 70s, I think, who he had, when they print prospectuses for mergers and so forth, they try very hard to hide the identity right up until, like, literally the minute the presses run. But they have to prepare the prospectuses before then, and he deduced what the companies were, and he went out and traded on them. So he got gigged for insider trading, but the Supreme Court actually ruled that no, this was not insider trading because he didn't have a fiduciary duty to hold this information private. However, a few years later, a fellow named R. Foster Winans, who was writing the Heard on the Street column for the Wall Street Journal, was essentially leaking what was going to be in the column to traders who would then trade on that information before it ran. And he was also done for insider trading. And in this case, they ruled against him. And what they said was he had misappropriated information that belonged to his employer. You might have actually gotten Grijalva on the same issue, but they didn't try for that particular crime. And so they said he'd misappropriated information. Well, this is actually really different from a fraud on the market, right? Because as one law professor I talked to pointed out, this implies that it's perfectly legal for the Wall Street Journal to front-run its own trades, right? Mm-hmm. And, you know, if you're talking about confidence, which is what a lot of people do, they say, well, it undermines confidence in the fairness of the market. Well, would it somehow less undermine confidence if the Wall Street Journal, we knew that they went out before they printed anything and traded in their stocks? No, of course not. So it's actually, the law is very complicated. So how does this apply to Congress? The problem with getting Congress for insider trading is who do they have, who employs them? From who would they actually be misappropriating this information? And they're not actually, you can say morally they're employees of the United States people, and I think I agree. Mm-hmm. And law professor Dinah Nagy has actually argued this, that they have a fiduciary duty. But it's not clear. It's not clear that they actually would violate the kind of rules we currently have surrounding insider trading.
Our guest with us until 10 o'clock to talk about this topic. And if you want to ask her questions, you can do so on our lines. For Republicans, 202-737-0002. For Democrats, 202-737-0001. For Independents, 202-628-0205. Journal at cspan.org is the email, and off of Twitter, it is cspanwj. Has a member of Congress ever been found guilty of insider trading?
No. In fact, as far as I was able to ascertain, they've never even been convicted of it. No one's ever gone after a congressman for insider trading. And sort of anecdotally, I tried to talk to people who prosecute these cases. I did not get a lot of interest in talking to a journalist about it, which I take to mean that for kind of understandable reasons, there's not a lot of interest in pursuing the issue, because it's not only, I think, because it's your boss who wants to go after your boss for insider trading, mm-hmm. ultimately, for a lot of these attorneys, right? It's the U.S. attorneys. But also because it's sort of inherently political. It's very difficult to, you know, who gets targeted by ethics investigations and so forth. It's not always true. I mean, there are really egregious cases that get gone after no matter whose party it is. But the boundary cases often get prosecuted when your party loses control. And so I don't think a lot of prosecutors want to kind of dive into that.
What kind of information would members of Congress have, say, if it were happening, to make these kind of decisions regarding stock?
Oh, all sorts of information. I mean, if you think about how many decisions Congress is making that could affect a company. I mean, the Lloyd Benson case, and we don't know that there was anything illegal about it. It may merely have been convenient, mm-hmm. Because it hasn't been investigated. But with that case, right, if you're a big dairy processor, knowing what the controlled price of milk is going to be, or knowing how that's going, are they going to lift the subsidies in the next farm bill? Is a highway bill going to go through land that's owned by a company that could sell it for a lot of money? How are you going to regulate various products? You can, Congress can and has in the past put companies almost out of business by changing the regulations that surround what they do. Pollution regulations, I mean, all sorts of CAFE standards for automakers. All of those things have enormous impact on companies. So it would be relatively easy if there were no controls on it, and if you didn't really have any sort of compunction about it, it would be relatively easy to make money by knowing what regulations we're going through, I think.
Megan McArdle, our guest till 10 o'clock. First call for her is Fort Walton Beach, Florida, Republican line. Mark, good morning.
Good morning. How are you today?
I'm fine, thanks. How are you?
Outstanding. Pure professional you are. Anyway, I want to make a point. I think the problem that we have in our history, when the executive branch and the legislative branch have run amok in corruption, which I think is what has actually happened, and you're never going to get anybody in Congress because they have friends, families that do investing for them, and then it all gets run through different things. That's never going to happen. But in our history, the media and the newspapers used to be the ones that had the power of another little check and balance to where they could inform the public of the culture of corruption and such. But what we have now is I think the media is corrupt as well. Because if you look at big business media and who they're in cahoots with as well, look at the Martha Stewart case. That case was just a pea pod, okay? And they busted her on telephone calls and such and this and that, and the media covered that 24/7.
Caller, thanks.
Oh, there's a lot there. I think that, one of the big issues is that Congress, there's the old Latin saying, quis custodius ipsos custodius, who watches the watchers, who guards the guardians. And the fact is that Congress is in charge of regulating itself, largely because of the dangers of having congressmen subject to kind of executive oversight or so forth. The law enforcement is an executive function. Now, that's not to say that they're never subject to the laws. They absolutely are. But that having someone else watch them is problematic. And so they watch themselves. And that is going to lead, as with any group that self-regulates. I mean, doctors have this problem, police have this problem, journalists have this problem, as the caller says, is that groups that self-regulate, you have a lot of sympathy for other members of your group, and also you don't want to layer yourself with onerous disclosure regulations when you know you're doing nothing wrong.
Delray Beach, Florida, on our Democrats line. Keith, go ahead. Keith, are you there? Let's try Keith one more time before we move on.
Oh, are you talking to me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, okay. It's Debbie. And I had a question regarding the recent Solandra, the solar company with Nancy Pelosi's, I guess, brother-in-law. And I was wondering if maybe that was being investigated. And also, do you consider lobbying, insider trading, and thirdly, countrywide loans if a congressperson gets a sweetheart deal with Countrywide?
Well, okay, so these are actually three separate questions. And I think the first question about Pelosi's brother-in-law really illustrates the limits of this. Even if you required Congress to divest themselves of all their stocks, they would still have family and friends, people they love, who, if mom has a family farm and sells cows and, sells milk, you're going to care about dairy regulations in a way more than someone who doesn't have a direct financial stake in their family. You can't get rid of that. You can't require Nancy Pelosi not to have brother-in-laws who make investments. On lobbying, it's a complicated question, and I think certainly, but a little bit outside of the scope of this article, which pertains directly to the question of, is something that is a crime for everyone else not a crime for congresspeople? More broadly, we can catch people who have their brother. It's actually very common for people to try to evade insider trading regulations by having family members trade for them, and they do get caught. There's a recent case of an FDA employee who is actually, I believe, placing these trades through family members in China. They still caught him. And so it's actually harder than you think to get away with it consistently, because we now have computer programs that pick these things out if someone's looking, you know, so.
So, Megan McCardle, I have a copy here of a financial disclosure statement that's required by Congress. Couldn't you say that since members of Congress have to fill this out, then you could find those trends if people are getting benefits from trading?
Well, sort of. So they do have to fill out financial disclosure forms, and I do not want to imply that most members of Congress are not honest about filling these out. I have no reason to think otherwise. But if you look at a case like Charlie Rangel, who had all sorts of interests he wasn't disclosing, either on these forms or indeed to the IRS, you know, this went on for years, where he had tax income from a rental house in Costa Rica that he wasn't reporting. He had all sorts of sweetheart deals with developers who were giving him rent-controlled apartments, but he had 4 rent-controlled apartments from one developer, basically, which is 3 more than you're supposed to have in the city of New York for your own use. And you know, that stuff, it's really hard to catch because no one's auditing these forms. And in lots of cases, for example, 2 of the professors that I talked to, because interestingly, people have done follow-up and shown that they actually underperform the market a little bit, that they're kind of like grandma. So it's still in contention whether or not this is actually happening, or whether maybe the financial disclosure forms and the publication of these studies has maybe made people think twice about doing this. You don't know. But what they said to me is there's not even a space to report short selling. And if you think about all the regulations that could adversely affect a company, short selling is kind of, in a lot of cases, the obvious thing to do. You find out that we've just discontinued some big bomber that Boeing's making, and you short the stock before we actually do the announcement. That's not even reported on these forms.
According to Open Secrets, when it comes to income on the disclosure forms, the source and amounts of income have to be reported exceeding $200. The source, but not the amount of a spouse's income over $1,000. The cap on outside income, that was $24,000 in 2005. When it comes to assets worth more than $1,000 at the end of a calendar year, the value type and amount of income produced more than $200, and purchases and sales of exchanges amounting to more than $1,000, along with the date and the amount transacted. What other information could be put on these forms that might be of interest of those who would examine?
Well, I mean, short sales would be a big one. But I think more broadly, the question of auditing is the real issue, is that these forms are only reported retrospectively. So you only get the data years after it happened, at which point it's really old news. Who cares, right? You know, so Charlie Rangel traded some stock 3 years ago. It's a lot harder to get the energy to go and do these cases. That was a hypothetical, by the way. I'm not adding new charges to Charlie Rangel's ethics investigation. But, you know, so the audit, I think, is actually the largest thing. The frequency of reporting. You know, insiders who trade in their own stock have to report these things much more closer to real time. And it seems to me reasonable to, at the very least, require Congress to do that. But I actually think when you think about not just the possibility for insider trading, but when you think about all of the conflicts of interest, and I think all of us know that no matter how hard you try to not think about conflicts of interest, it's difficult to divorce yourself entirely. How easy is it to cancel a fighter if you own a big chunk of Boeing stock? And so maybe we should think about having congressmen put their assets into blind trusts.
Fort Knox, Kentucky. Peter, Independent Line.
Yes, good morning.
Go ahead, sir.
Yes, very quickly. Ma'am, is there any way possible that your organization and yourself could do some investigating into the history of congressional conflict of interest since the Vietnam War era? I'm from that period of time when it was a known fact out on the street that many of your members of Congress and their staff members had what was called stock holdings in defense contract companies that were engaged in contractual operations in Vietnam. And since then, it's another source of information for these congressmen to quickly move along is also that because they have connections with these lobbyists of these companies, the lobbyists, who's to not say that they're bringing information to them about potential contracts that are coming up in war zones. Unfortunately, that would be known as war profiteering. To get to my question, will you and your organization conduct a series which covers possible congressional connections with lobbyists of these corporations?
We'll leave it there.
I think people do those sorts of investigations. I mean, this information is available. You can see, at least to the extent that they've put it on their disclosure forms, who owned what. But as I say, this really goes back to the core problem, which is that unless we have them divest all of their assets so that they don't know what's in the blind trust, there's always going to be conflicts of interest. If it isn't defense contracts, it could well be agribusiness or many of the other things that Congress affects every day.
A viewer asked, how about financial disclosure for the Supremes? That's in quote, and I assume he means the Supreme Court. Do you know is it just Congress members that have to fill these type of forms, or do?
Oh no, the Supreme Court also does disclosure. I assume that what he is referring to is Clarence Thomas has been widely there have been a lot of people suggesting that Clarence Thomas should recuse himself because his wife has been an active campaigner against health care. I think that's a little bit of a stretch in a bunch of ways. It's not really shocking that Clarence Thomas's wife is campaigning against health care. She was an activist before they got married. And it's not clear that, she doesn't necessarily do worse if health care passes, right? It does, if it stays live, it's not like Ginny Thomas does worse in that way. She then gets to go out and raise a whole bunch of more money to campaign against it. And so there's actually not an obvious financial conflict of interest the way there is with a corporate form.
Huntsville, Texas. Good morning. Clay, Republican line.
Hello, I have a question, and my question is, do we know what industry that Congress is actually...
This question, the yeas are 189, the nays are 233. The amendment is not adopted. The unfinished business is a request for a recorded vote on Amendment Number 2, printed in Part B of House Report 112-258 by the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Markey, on which further proceedings were postponed, on which the noes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment Number 2, printed in Part B of House Report Number 112-258, offered by Mr. Markey of Massachusetts.
Recorded vote has been requested. Those in favor of taking this vote by a recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having arisen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their vote by electronic device. This will be a 2-minute vote.
The bill would let the federal government swap land with a mining company in Arizona. The company wants to mine copper on federal land. In exchange, the government would get land now owned by the Resolution Mining Company, adding 5,000 acres to the Tonto National Forest. This is the second of 3 amendment votes at Markey of Massachusetts, with an amendment which would require the Resolution Copper Company to pay an 8% royalty on all locatable minerals produced from the federal land that's conveyed in the exchange in the bill.
And the yeas are 173, the nays are 238. The amendment is not agreed to. The unfinished business is a request for a recorded vote on amendment number 3, printed in Part B of House Report 112-258 by the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Grijalva, on which further proceedings were postponed, on which the noes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 3, printed in Part B of House Report number 112-258, offered by Mr. Grijalva of Arizona.
Recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of a recorded vote will rise and be counted, a sufficient number having arisen. A recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their vote by electronic device. This will be a 2-minute vote.
And this is the last amendment vote on a bill that would create the largest copper mine in the country near Superior, Arizona, expand the Tonto National Forest. This amendment by Raul Grijalva of Arizona would require Resolution Copper to locate the Remote Mining Operations Center in Superior, Arizona, to recruit and hire local employees, require all ore originating from the mine to remain in the United States, and require that all equipment used by the mine be manufactured in the U.S. Again, the last amendment vote, it's a 2-minute vote. C-SPAN covered a number of hearings today on Capitol Hill, some of which you'll see later in our program schedule, including the Joint Deficit Reduction Committee in their 4th public meeting. That'll be later in our schedule. And also Homeland Security Secretary Janet Napolitano testifying before the House Homeland Security Committee earlier today. We'll have that for you in our schedule as well. And you can, if you're on Twitter, you can stay on top of the latest schedule. Just follow C-SPAN Now.
On this question, the yeas are 182, the nays are 240. The amendment is not agreed to. The question is on the amendment in the nature of a substitute. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. The amendment is adopted, and accordingly, under the rule, the committee rises.
Take that one over there and do it just once today. Once this time.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Speaker, the whole House of the State of the Union has had under consideration H.R. 1904 and pursuant to House Resolution 444, reporting the bill back to the House with an amendment adopted in the Committee of the Whole.
The Chair of the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union reports that the committee has under consideration the bill H.R. 1904 and pursuant to the House Resolution 444 reports the bill back to the House with an amendment adopted in the Committee of the Whole. Under the rule, the previous question is ordered and is a separate vote demanded on any amendment to the amendment reported from the Committee of the Whole. If not, the question is on adoption of the committee amendment in the nature of a substitute as amended. Those in favor will say aye. Those opposed will say no. The ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. The question is on engrossment and third reading of the bill. Those in favor will say aye. Those opposed will say no. The ayes have it. Third reading.
The bill to facilitate the efficient extraction of mineral resources in southeast Arizona by authorizing and directing an exchange of federal and non-federal land and for other purposes.
The House will come to order. Please take their seats. The House will come to order. Members, please take their seats. The House will come to order. And how long are we looking here? The Chair would ask all present to rise for the purpose of a moment of silence. I ask that the House now observe a moment of silence in remembrance of our brave men and women in uniform who have given their lives in the service of our nation in Iraq and Afghanistan and their families, and of all those who serve in our armed forces and their families. For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida rise?
Mr. Speaker, I have a motion to recommit at the desk.
Is the gentleman opposed to the bill?
I am opposed in its current form.
The gentleman qualifies. The clerk will report the motion.
Mr. Deutsch of Florida moves to recommit the bill H.R. 1904 to the Committee on Natural Resources with instructions to report the same back to the House forthwith with the following amendment. Page 6, line 19, relating to the definition of resolution copper mining, LLC, insert before the period the following, except that such term shall not include any company, successor, assign, affiliate, member, or joint venturer with an ownership interest in any property or project, any portion of which is owned by the Iran Foreign Investment Company.
House will be in order. The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, bipartisan unity may be rare these days.
The gentleman's correct. The House is not in order. Gentleman may proceed.
But if there is one issue we have consistently come together on, it is the threat posed by a nuclear-armed Iran. That's why last year this body voted to enact tough new sanctions aimed at preventing Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons. That's why 332 members of this House.
The House will be in order. Gentleman may proceed.
Mr. Speaker, that's why 332 members of this House are today co-sponsors of new legislation to strengthen Iran sanctions law. And it is also why this body should join me on this final amendment to the bill, so we do not reward companies that provide financial aid and material support to the Iranian regime, because this bill, in its current form, will bolster Iran's illicit quest for nuclear weapons. This legislation awards U.S. land to Resolution Copper, a company owned by Rio Tinto. Rio Tinto also owns a majority stake in the Rossing uranium mine in Namibia.
Gentleman will suspend. The gentleman deserves to be heard. Gentleman may proceed.
In Namibia, where it's partners with the Iran Foreign Investment Company, the Iran Foreign Investment Company is wholly owned by the Iranian regime, and last summer, the Treasury Department added it to the list of Iranian entities in violation of sanctions law. Quite simply, we are about to reward a company that partners with the Iranian regime to mine, of all things, the uranium it needs to become a nuclear power. This Congress cannot be in the business of assisting a regime that plots attacks on the U.S. soil, that kills brave American soldiers in Iraq and Afghanistan, and threatens to wipe our ally Israel off the map. Iran has made its intentions clear. The Iranian nuclear program is not intended for peaceful purposes. Just last month, an IAEA report indicated increasing Mr. Speaker, the House is not in order.
Gentleman is correct. If members would please take their conversations from the floor. Gentleman may proceed.
The IAEA noted the military dimensions to the Iranian program. The threat is real, and this Congress has always taken it seriously. We have watched Iran attempt to make a mockery of U.S. law by finding new ways to evade sanctions, and now we are going to help them do it? My amendment does one thing. It blocks any land exchange with a company or affiliate connected to the Iran Foreign Investment Company. Let me be clear. This amendment will not prevent the passage of the legislation. If adopted, it will be incorporated and we will vote on the final bill. We have come together against a nuclear-armed Iran before, and we could do it again today. Let's put partisanship aside. Join me on this motion to recommit, and let's unite against the very real threat of a nuclear-armed Iranian regime. I am pleased to yield to the ranking member, Mr. Markey.
Amen. The bill before us today proposes to give away national forest land to the Resolution Copper Corporation so they can build a giant copper mine.
Suspend. Gentleman may continue.
There could be somewhere between $2 billion and $7 billion worth of copper on this land. So who exactly is this company that is going to be the beneficiary of Republican majority largesse? A controlling 55% of Resolution Copper's shares are owned by the giant mining conglomerate Rio Tinto. Now, what else does Rio Tinto own? It turns out Rio Tinto owns 65% of the world's largest open-pit uranium mine, the Rossing mine in Namibia. Their second largest partner in the Rossing uranium mine with a 15% stake and 2 people on the board of directors is none other than the government of Iran. The UN Security Council has 6 times approved resolutions condemning Iran for its violations of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, and this House has twice enacted strong Iran nuclear sanctions, and yet Rio Tinto is in partnership with the Iranian government to mine uranium. For what purpose? And with this bill today, we are rewarding Rio Tinto. We are telling Rio Tinto, never mind the UN sanctions, never mind the sanctions of U.S. law. What the Deutsche Amendment does is say, if you want to do business with America, you need to stop doing business with Iran and Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. Under this amendment, as soon as Rio Tinto severs its partnership with Iran and Ahmadinejad Rio Tinto's Resolution Copper affiliate can proceed to take title to these very valuable federal lands in Arizona, in the United States of America. I don't think that's too much for this Congress to ask. Vote for a strong nuclear non-proliferation policy. Send a message to Ahmadinejad. Vote for the Deutsch Amendment.
Does the gentleman yield back? Gentleman yields back.
Yield back the balance of my time.
Purposes, the gentleman from Washington rise.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in opposition to the motion to recommit.
Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, let me be perfectly clear, and I will say this as slowly as I can so it can be understood. This bill does not waive any economic sanction laws. All of those laws still stand. Now, let me say this. This bill is about creating jobs in Arizona. By creating jobs in Arizona, we are creating American jobs in Arizona. It is interesting to me how I hear the other side, all of these different ideas. The debate has been going on some time, probably about 3 years. It's about creating jobs in this country. Our on this side is very simple. It's simple because it's based on the premise of our country. We rely on the private sector. We rely on people to make an investment to create American jobs. Their side, what they want to do, and we heard this in the debate, is to raise taxes and create public jobs. This creates private jobs. I say vote no on the motion to recommit and pass the bill, and I yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back. Without objection, the previous question is ordered. The question is on the motion to recommit. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed will say no. No. The noes have it.
Mr. Speaker, I ask for a recorded vote.
A recorded vote is requested. Those favoring a recorded vote will rise. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. Pursuant to Clause 8 and Clause 9 of Rule 20, this is a 15-minute vote on the motion to recommit H.R. 1904. Will be preceded by a 5-minute vote on passage of H.R. 1904, ordering the previous question on the House Resolution 448, adopting House Resolution 448 if ordered, and suspending the rules and passing H.R. 2527. It's a 15-minute vote.
The underlying bill would let the government swap land in Arizona with a mining company. The company wants to mine copper on federal land. It would create the largest copper mine in the country and also give the exchange for the government some 5,000 acres to the Tonto National Forest. Democrats trying to change the bill with this motion to recommit, which would in effect prohibit the Iran Foreign Investment Company from participating. This is a 15-minute vote. Final passage vote will happen after this, and then the rule vote coming up after that for a couple of bills, one for 2 measures, one with both of them concerning the Internal Revenue Code, one repealing the 3% government withholding on contractor payments. But this motion to recommit, 15 minutes, and on the issue of Iran, we covered a hearing earlier today. The Subcommittee on Counterterrorism and Intelligence held a hearing today on Capitol Hill. And one of the witnesses was retired General Jack Keane, who testified today, was asked by Representative Marty Meehan what the U.S. should do with Iran. He said that the U.S. has to recognize them as an enemy and that sanctions aren't tough enough, and suggested covert operations. We're going to show you a portion from that hearing earlier today as this vote continues.
Colonel, I agree with you that we have had a timid response to Iran since 1979. General Keane, you outlined, I thought, very masterfully all the attacks and attempted attacks on the interests of the United States since 1979, and the failure of both parties, either parties in administrations prior, to adequately respond to the threat. And now we have an attempted assassination attempt on a foreign official in our nation's capital. Unfortunately, it was foiled, but according to your testimony, General Keane, this goes to the highest levels when you said that the Ayatollah Khomeini, at a minimum, approved the plan and may have directed it. That's very bold. And if true, I think deserves a proper response. You've mentioned that our policy has failed, and we've had sanctions on and off since 1979, and yet we're still faced with this threat that continues. And I think you mentioned we need to treat Iran as a strategic enemy. I agree with that. And so to both the General and the Colonel, what do you think should be the proper response to deal with Iran?
Well, as I said in my remarks, that step one is to recognize them as our strategic enemy and therefore use all the elements of national power as such to push against that enemy. And I'm not suggesting that the first push should be a military one, quite the contrary. But let's face it, I mean, even the sanctions we use have never had any major impact on these guys because they're not tough enough. Lay down every single interest that they have and then counter that interest. We know that when they took power, they took all the Shah's business interests around the world, many of them in Europe and some of them in the Middle East. They have those business interests. They're billionaires because of it. Let's go get them. Why do we tolerate that? And there's so many other things that we can do, and people on this panel have outlined those things. And let's not wring our hands if the international community doesn't want to step up to it. We go without them. If we don't take measures, serious measures, and introduce fear to them, they are going to keep killing us until they eventually get a weapon that can truly hurt us. So I'm suggesting that we get comprehensive and holistic about what we're doing. I'm not suggesting for a minute that we start with some small things and then lead up to larger things. I'm saying we put our hand around their throat right now in every interest that they have. We have a significant offensive cyber capability in this country that no one else in the world has. Some are close. We can do limited cyber attacks. That takes a presidential finding. But why aren't we doing that? It would have rather dramatic impact. Why are we permitting the Quds Force leaders who have been organizing this killing of us for 30 years to go around still walking around? Why don't we kill them? We kill other people who are running terrorist organizations against the United States. These guys have killed almost 1,000 of us. Why don't we kill them? And why don't we conduct espionage against them? We have people in our government to know how to do this. I am not suggesting a military action. I am suggesting covert action that has a degree of deniability to it. My partner to my left here knows more about this than I could possibly ever know. But I am suggesting that...
And unfortunately, I only have a minute left, and let me just say this. I agree. I don't think anybody wants to go to war with Iran, but I do think we need a tougher response, particularly in light of this assassination attempt, in the nation's capital. Colonel, I want to give you the last word in my little bit of time left. You discussed quite extensively a connection between Tehran and Caracas, between Iran and Venezuela and Latin America, the fact that Hezbollah forces are in Latin America, the fact that Hezbollah forces may actually be working with drug cartels. I think, in your words, this probably wasn't a cold call. They may have been connected with them previously. Could you expand upon that?
Well, it's almost like a play I've seen before, establishing a base in Lebanon and using that, and look what they have expanded that to today, where really it's preventing any kind of the larger issues. It's preventing any kind of accommodation between the Palestinians and the Israelis. That with the Hamas, they've expanded that. They've become a major player and a major threat that they never had before that. That's why I say the Iranian Revolutionary Guard moving to Lebanon at the time we were there on a peacekeeping mission was a game changer, because they've got capabilities with them that certainly weren't there before. I mean, the bomb that we faced wasn't put together by any Shias, wasn't put together by any weekend over a garage. It was the largest non-nuclear explosion ever recorded. Still retains that. The magnitude of the bomb really predetermined mass casualties and the removal, really the destruction of the mission at the same time. Moving that to Venezuela and so on, I would state that the CUDS commander connection with the assassination plot here is the fellow that I pin as has to be one of the key guys in the planning and control of the CUDS force, is the founder that was in Beirut, is current Minister of Defense Vahidi. He's the one that founded it. He's the one that just look at the jobs he's had before he's been the Minister of Defense. And it's all key jobs that lays out, like I mentioned, a roadmap. And he was in Venezuela earlier this year. He was expelled from Bolivia after the Interpol came, because he's on their red notices, but he travels under diplomatic cover. The point is he's probably the key guy that's orchestrating all this, not only the use of the CUDS force, but specific missions, I would think, and has that kind of influence, well, with the mullahs.
Thank you, Colonel. Let me also echo Dr. Levitt's testimony that the CUDS should be designated as a foreign terrorist organization. I think that would be helpful. And these flights going between Caracas and Tehran, they cannot be checked by Interpol. The international community cannot check these flights. And I've had Bolivian lawmakers tell me that there's uranium on those flights going to Iran. And I think it's time, as General King mentioned, to start stepping up to the plate and responding. So with that, I now recognize the gentlelady from California, Ms. Spear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you again to all of our witnesses, and I don't think we can say often enough to General Keane and Colonel Garrity the great service that you've provided to our country. It is very commendable. Let me start with you, Dr. Korb. You testified about a few of the successes the various sanction programs have achieved. Can you describe the UN sanctions that are designed to restrict Iran's access to global financial systems?
Last June, the UN Security Council adopted its toughest set of sanctions, and the U.S., the EU, Australia, Japan, South Korea, and Norway followed up with sanctions of their own. And the goal is to restrict Iran's access to the global financial system, especially major banks. There are provisions in the resolution that prohibit any financial services, meaning banking, insurance, reinsurance, to Iran if there's reason to believe those services could assist Iran's nuclear firms. These sanctions have been very powerful, I think more powerful than most people expected. And they've had particularly tangible effects on Iran's oil industry and associated sectors. And that's why I mentioned what President Reagan used to call the misery index is beginning to have, create problems for Iran internally.
You referenced in your comments as well that the plot may indeed be a sign of Iran's weakness and desperation. Can you expand upon that a little bit for us?
Well, I think if you take a look at the fact that the government now is in chaos, they're concerned about the Arab Spring because this is undermining the Iranian narrative that, the Islamic Republic should be the future of the Arab and Muslim world. We know that when President Ahmadinejad accepted some of our offers about enriching nuclear energy and asked for us giving him nuclear materials that they be used for medicinal purposes, he was undermined by the ruling clerics. And as I mentioned this morning, the ruling clerics are now basically saying that they don't want to have a president anymore, and we know what happened, of course, in the 2009 election. So with their influence declining, with them having economic problems, this was, as some people talk about, if in fact it's true, a potential game changer to show that they're still relevant. And I think the very fact that they allowed this renegade, I mean, this was the Keystone Cops. I mean, this was not a success, you know, if you take a look at the way this was done. The very fact that they would allow that to happen shows that the country is in disarray and they're becoming desperate.
And you can see all of that hearing later, the hearing on recent allegations that Iran attempted to assassinate the Saudi ambassador to the U.S. and the broader implications of U.S. policy on Iran. That's tonight at 8 o'clock Eastern here on C-SPAN. And you can stay on top of the C-SPAN schedule at twitter.com. Follow C-SPAN now. On the House floor, they're voting on a motion to recommit, and final passage is next on a bill that would swap land from a mining company in Arizona. The government would get 5,000 additional acres for the Tonto National Forest, and the Resolution Mining Company 2,400 acres of land near Superior, Arizona. Final passage is next. And then the vote on a rule for two bills, one repealing the requirement that the government withhold 3% from government contractors to ensure their tax compliance, and the other, effectively paying for that repeal, would include Social Security income when calculating Medicaid and subsidy eligibility under the new health care law. The rule for those bills coming up, the vote on that coming up shortly. They won't debate that bill, those bills, until tomorrow.
On this vote, the yeas are 187, the nays are 237. The motion is not adopted. The question is on passage of the bill. Those in favor will say aye. Those opposed will say no. The chairs, the ayes have it. Gentleman from